The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everybody for taking time to stop by and be with us this evening, those here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. And we appreciate each and every one of you. No matter where you are listening from. If you are listening from somewhere other than here in the chat room and you'd like to come over and join in with all these wonderful people, you can go to the para-x.com and click on the live chat button and you'll be in with all of us. So with that, if you have questions tonight, you can private chat them to either Ceiling Cat co-host, Jeff is not in there, or myself, Henry Host, and we will get those answered for you because we got some great guests going to be on tonight. With that also, there are a lot of other places that you can do all this from. Is that right, Kat?
Yes, that's correct, Henry. You can also message us on Facebook in our group, facebook.com/The Paranormal View, all one phrase. You can tweet messages over to us at Paraview Radio on Twitter, and you can also email us at theparanormalview@gmail.com. You can put the subject question, and I will get back to you.
All right.
And a little bit of housekeeping. There still is sound issues with Google Chrome. So if you are having trouble connecting to us, you might want to try using Firefox or Internet Explorer to be able to get sound.
Right. And there are little other listening devices down at the bottom underneath the Para-X radio bar. You can use also either one of those, Winamp, or I believe there's 2 or 3 others. Real Player, QuickTime, I believe, is down there. You can click on either one of those and you will be able to listen to the show if you do not have sound. So, with that, like I said, we got great guests tonight, and we have a lot to talk about with them. So I'm going to, I forgot, we have with us tonight Kat Cloco.
Good evening, everyone.
And we have Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
And we have Barbara Duncan.
Hello, folks.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and let Kat introduce our guest tonight.
Well, hello and welcome everyone to the Paranormal View. This is our first show of the new year, 2017. And with us tonight we have Paul and Ben Eno. Paul Ben Eno began paranormal research in 1970 while studying for the priesthood. His mentors include parapsychologist Dr. Louisa Rhine, Father John J. Nicola, the technical advisor to The Exorcist, and first-generation ghost hunters Ed and Lorraine Warren. He graduated from 2 seminaries, but was expelled from a third because of his paranormal work. He became an award-winning New England journalist and author of 7 books. Tonight we also have Ben Eno, his son, who joined his dad's adventures at the age of 13 and at 16 became the youngest syndicated broadcaster in America. Ben is a sound expert and a graduate of Emerson College in Boston. Welcome to the show, you guys.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Ah, yeah, and we're all snowed in here in Rhode Island.
Aren't we? We are.
Well, I mean, you know, it's just winter here, you know.
It's just winter.
That's it.
It's just winter. It's just what happens.
Not much of a
finally
storm.
snowed.
Well, we do have a little snow here in Cincinnati area. Did the other day, and there's still some left around. But we just have the cold air. It's down to like under 10 degrees right now. So,
wow.
We have.
Well,
I didn't realize it was that chilly.
Yes, it has been real cold the last 3 days. and it's not supposed to start warming up till about Monday or Tuesday, I think.
Well, as Mark Twain once said, there is no such thing as climate in New England, only weather.
Only weather, huh?
And that is true. So we have your new book here tonight, which I have been reading through. It's called Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong. And I believe it's available on Amazon and at schifferbooks.com. Is it available on your website as well?
Yes, it is. The autographed copies can come from behindtheparanormal.com. It should be in most of the stores as well. If they don't have it, they can get it.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, it's one of the most unique books on the paranormal I've read in a long time. And
thank you. What Mark Twain also said, I can live 6 months on one good compliment.
One good compliment.
I always heard it was 2 weeks, but that'll do.
Yeah.
And as an anthropologist by training and a researcher, I like this book because it adds some extra hypotheses and theories to the field of the paranormal. And I'm excited to be bringing them to our listeners tonight. And I really want to talk about parasites because those are very interesting.
Yeah, they sure are.
That's one way to put it, I suppose. Yeah.
When you say parasites, you mean sites involving the paranormal, or stuff that's like in your belly, or both?
Maybe I don't know.
There's a
Ben,
great book by Colin Wilson called The Mind Parasites, in which he talks about this very subject, which is these beings that just sort of get into your head and start playing with your emotions. So it was another one of those aha moments we were talking about.
Like politicians or something?
Like emotional
no,
parasites, and
Yeah. But first, actually, I'm really interested in both of your backgrounds with the paranormal. And Paul, you go first. Please let all of our listening audience know, what is your background? How did you end up working with the Warrens? And how did you get dismissed from the priesthood?
Okay, well, I was never ordained to the priesthood. I think perhaps the church and I both had a lucky escape, but the fact was that I did attend 2 seminaries, graduated from 2, and then went over to the Orthodox Church and continued in their seminary. And they're the ones that had enough of me because they thought, I should have my nose in my books and not be researching the paranormal, even though I'd worked with some of these people you mentioned. But the background really, at the beginning, was when I was about 7 years old, and the usual bio says, well, I lived in a haunted house. Well, I didn't live in a haunted house. I did, however, you can imagine how difficult this was to talk about at all. I was witness at the age of 7 to my father's suicide. And he was a Protestant, garden variety Protestant. My mother was a strict Roman Catholic, and I went to a strict Roman Catholic school. And the thing was that if you ate a hot dog on Friday or did things like this, then that would have been bad news. You go to hell, right? And it's just like that. So rather than ask, well, what kind of God is this? I asked, what happened to my father? And it was several years later. My brother was already in the seminary. He became a priest, a rather well-known theologian later on. But I went into the seminary and I began to wonder, well, what about what could ghosts be? Where could my father be? And the whole doctrine of purgatory, which is something Roman Catholics might know about. If you're not bad enough to go to hell or not good enough to go to heaven, you go to purgatory for a while and you get purged, hence the name, and off you go to heaven, hopefully after that. So that's where I started in the paranormal, and I got much more than I bargained for, and I didn't, nothing I ran into from day one even fit anything like that, and it didn't fit the old ideas about what ghosts are either. So that's how I got started.
Wow. Ben, how did you get interested?
Well, I mean, I was spawned by my father here, so that's essentially how that started. Any other questions? No,
the Frankenstein thing.
Yeah, essentially. Well, I mean, when I was a kid, we used to do these things called lock-ins in my middle school. And so it was like we would raise money for charity and we'd hang out after school and whatever, and we'd have different events that were going on. And every year, my dad did a ghost story talk or whatever. So he'd set up a projector in the library. All these kids would come in and sit down and listen to his stories, and they would always be like really like spooked out by it. And so I became known as the kid who was like, "Oh, your dad hunts ghosts." But I grew up with this guy, so of course I'm going to follow in his footsteps in some way, shape, or form. So you don't expect your own house to be haunted, and it was not haunted. But I did go with him on like 1 or 2 cases before I really got involved, and now it's sort of become history since we've written a book together.
Now, you guys, your book starts out talking about everything right from the beginning. And one of the things you had in there was like the beginning of the Bible. The beginning with the mystery of how it all started. Do we base the beginning of everything on what the Bible says? Like, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth?
I believe it was Julie Andrews who said the beginning is a very good place to start. So why not go with something that's extremely old to start with? Because we really don't know much about our past, if you think about it. The oldest documents we have are these 3 things. You have the Old Testament, the Karsag epics, and the Mahabharata Gita and the Mahabharata of India. So that's actually 4 things. So you have to go back to something where we can at least find something like tangible that's written down. So, I guess start from the very beginning and how the paranormal influenced history.
Well, if I might add a little bit, we deal with these documents in that first chapter, which is called the Elohim Enigma. And I think it's as good a place to start as anywhere, because the more people who are going to read this book are familiar with the book of Genesis than they are with the Mahabharata, the Karsag epics, or the Atrahasis documents. Okay, and it really I wanted to read these things in the original language. I couldn't quite get through the ancient Sumerian, but I read it in French instead. But I went down to Temple Bethel in Providence, and some years ago, and they had never taught us Hebrew in the seminary. They taught us Greek and Latin, but never Hebrew. And I said, that's kind of important, because when you read things in the original languages, even the New Testament, it doesn't always say what it says in English, because the translations are lousy and are colored by people's beliefs, whoever's doing the translating very often. So with the Elohim thing, it was a real eye-opener. The trouble with Hebrew, was especially ancient Hebrew, is that there are no vowels, and the words are not separated. Everything just runs together. So really, how you read it and how you interpret it is really up to what you happen to believe. Modern Hebrew has vowel marks, so it's easier to read. But in Genesis, what Henry just quoted, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, it reads quite differently from a different point of view, which is just as legitimate as the point of view most of us have. It says, when it began, or when it started, the shining ones, that's the word Elohim, the first word used for God in the Bible, stood in the heights and looked down with pleasure upon the highlands and the lowlands. Now, what the hay is that about? The shining ones, plural, come, of course, is the translation that I think it could very easily be used, and I believe it's absolutely solid, of the word Elohim, which has a feminine root and a masculine plural ending. It's the only word in any Semitic language like that. So, there you have it. So that's where we begin, right at the beginning.
Well, if it goes in that, the big question, I guess, then, if God was the one that was supposed to created everything, or gods, exactly where did God come from?
Oh, well, I think, Ben could answer this just as easily as I could. Nobody's questioning God. As a matter of fact, as we go in the book, we get into a chapter toward the end called What is Heaven? And also we get into beliefs about God. And the ultimate point of the book, I think, is that we're not dealing, or the ultimate theory anyways, is we're not dealing with just one creation, one world. the entirety of the paranormal, we believe, can begin to be explained perhaps by the theory of multiple worlds, multiple physical worlds, perhaps an infinite number. And I suppose maybe I was more influenced by my theological education than people might think, because what were we taught early on in any Christian religion at all? Essentially that God created the world out of an explosion of divine love. That's what we learned in the seminary anyway. Explosion of divine love. Well, if divine love is infinite, why shouldn't creation be infinite if it's an explosion of that love? Everything God does is infinite. And that would mean what physics has been more than hinting at in the past century, really, that there are, or particularly since the 1950s and Eliot's theories of the multiple worlds, that we have every possible possibility exists in concrete reality somewhere or somewhen in what is known as the multiverse or the metaverse, which is this elegant interactive family of every possibility. So that, I think, is better theology, if I say so myself, than a lot of what you would hear in church or in the seminary. An infinite God creating an infinite creation. So essentially, I think that what we're suggesting glorifies God. It doesn't denigrate, or it questions some very narrow interpretations of some ancient beliefs, perhaps. But that's again, but we make no claims anywhere in this book. People can take it or leave it, and just accept it or not accept it as they please. So, but I think we start at the beginning with God, and that's, I think, a beginning to understanding what God's doing.
Sounds good.
And that's what I liked about this, was adding the idea of the many worlds theory to it, instead of just focusing on, I think, what is called the spiritualist base, or the spiritualist theory that we're working on with ghost investigations. And this is the point of view I'm looking at it from, ghost investigations from the 1840s, 1860s.
Well, the Fox sisters in the 1840s.
Yeah.
But again, that's the best information they had. They didn't know about, hadn't thought about multiple worlds, at least not for several thousand years, perhaps. I think our remote ancestors knew about this, but you ended up with a very two-dimensional spiritualist idea, and the ghosts are spirits of the dead. What else could they be? When you see your grandmother, hopping down the bunny trail, a couple of weeks after her funeral, then, I mean, what else could it be but some remnant of her? And maybe it is, maybe we're wrong, but I've never, ever, nor has Ben, if I may speak for him, in any of our cases, found that old stuff to be true. Again, if you look at it from an entirely new point of view here, not entirely, I mean, we're not the originators of this, this is how we experience it. Maybe we're bringing some of it together, but everything changes. You're in these houses, investigate. It's the guy who killed himself in the garage, 100 years ago or something. And must be. What else could it be? And he responds to the name and knows about the history. But when I go in there and say, I don't believe you're so and so, because it just doesn't feel right, everything changes. And again, everything is wrong. Actually, the publisher wanted to, because that's the motto of our radio show. But we put it in the book as a subtitle. And I think it really says it, because it's really the first day of school from a new point of view.
Oh yeah. Well, I like it when you go back, not just referencing what the Bible is, but all the other different texts and old ancient writings that is even further back than what these are.
Yeah, well, they all kind of say the same thing.
Yeah, because I think there's more to it than just what we as the Christians and the King James and all that. There's a whole lot more, and I think it does lose a lot of translation that they put into that book from all the other ancient writings.
Well, one of the problems with all ancient writings, including, unfortunately, the Bible, is that, and I've seen some of these really ancient documents, is that nobody knows what the original words actually were, because you've got hand copies upon hand copies upon hand copies for centuries, mistakes multiplying as they went. There's a document that I happened to see And it had one of the scribes were barely literate themselves in many cases. They could just copy. And one scribe writes to the other in the margin, "Why did you change the original?" And you tear your hair out. Mine's falling out anyway, but because you just can't, what was the original? There are documents, particularly, after the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that are older than the ones we have, but yet they aren't quite the same, and you don't know if they're more accurate than the newer one. I mean, it's the biblical studies right now is just a really frustrating science for this. So we just, you believers would like to believe, that the Holy Spirit somehow kept it all together, and there's no reason not to believe that. But from a strictly, literary standpoint, there are all kinds of problems with the translation. So we try to go after that as well.
Right.
Well, one of my favorite mistranslations caused the death of millions and millions of innocent people, where originally the text was "Thou shalt not suffer a poisoner to live," and some translator thought, well, poisoner is an herbalist, somebody who understands plants. Right. Then that's the town wise woman, who is the town witch. So suddenly it became "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." And
you named it. You really nailed it there, Jeff. I mean, that's very true.
Well, way back to start with, when everything was first going, they didn't have any writings at all. Everything was by word of mouth, and everything was passed down year after year, century after century by word of mouth. And who could? I mean, if you sat around the table with 50 people and start something, by the time it gets back to the beginning, it's changed.
Yeah.
So just think what it's done over the centuries from way back at the beginning. So.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I don't know. It is what it is, and that's how we start out right at the beginning, and suggest that perhaps we may be dealing with a form of narrative that is quite familiar to any, I suppose, folklore student, because every story in human folklore. And human folklore is what? It's the vessel of the memory of the human race, really. And even if a story or a legend or even a joke has come down from our remote ancestors, it may have picked up a lot of baggage, but there is probably a root, a grain of truth around which that grew, like a raindrop, So somewhere or somewhen back in there, all the things that we read about, I'm not necessarily talking about the Bible, but everything we're reading about in any book of folklore, and Ben and his new wife gave me a lovely book of Irish folklore for Christmas. I'm looking forward to reading it. Everything in there will have had some grain of truth to it. So we mentioned that as well, and we think that, okay, what's behind the grain of truth? What was the grain? Well, if you look at this multiverse theory, you come back to that. Two things might have had tremendous influence on our remote history. One would be the parasites Kat had brought up earlier in the show, and who seem to be multiversal creatures. In other words, and Ben and I both run into them. They seem to cross what a physicist would call the brains, branes, as in membranes, between worlds in order to do what? Not to tempt us into hell, but to feed their life forms. We believe, and we've tangled with them on many occasions. I've tangled with them physically several times. They feed upon our apparently negative energy. And so here you have the grain from which stories about evil spirits grew, because they fill the bill. Because in order to eat, they have to push our buttons. And we've seen them do it in several worlds at the same time. Ben, you remember the case in Vermont, the haunted policeman, as we call it.
Oh, I remember very vividly.
Yeah. And when we get out of our vehicle, and immediately you and I were drawn to a corner of that property where something was going on at some other point in space-time, the multiverse, and something was feeding on it, and then it couldn't get enough to eat from that. It would go into the basement apartment of this police officer in a rural area of Vermont, and he said, it's funny you talk about them feeding, because when he and his fiancée would fight, they would actually see it walking around the apartment, and Ben later got a picture of it. This sort of, it looked almost like, Ben, you compare. I didn't want to show you the picture. because you were only 13. It was one of your first cases. And you said, no problem. It looked like one of the Black Riders from the Lord of the Rings, so you were cool with it. So that's one possibility, that we had influence in our ancient past from these parasites. And what's some of the evidence for that? Well, if you look at the ancient documents, particularly of the Sumerians, it's very strange. It was like 8,000 years ago, this civilization sprang up in the Middle East practically out of nowhere. It's like they were farmers and hunters one month, and the next month they were lawyers and doctors. I mean, it's just weird how quickly this sprang up. And what also sprang up was the worship of many, many gods. Now, a lot of people are surprised to hear this, but there is some considerable evidence that the original worship of our remote ancestors in the primitive times, so-called, was one god. Actually, more specifically, like a trinity, like a father, God, a mother, and like a child who was usually us. Even Yahweh from the Old Testament, the ancient Israelites, had, a lot of people don't realize this and don't like to hear it, but had a female counterpart known as the Shekinah. All right, as did the gods who were talked about in the other documents we mentioned in the book, the Atrahasis and the others that Ben mentioned. So I think we're dealing with a grain of truth here that is really quite stunning. And so parasites might have been influencing people, and could they come along? They could do this, that, the other thing. They appear to manipulate space and time. Aha! What have we got here? A god, or a demon. And I think they went to town with that. And I think we've seen modern examples of how that might have happened. The Bell Witch case of Robertson County, Tennessee, 1817 to 1821, for example. We mentioned this in the book. If this had not been a strict 19th century Protestant community, I think there were 4 parasites operating, because I was consultant on the film American Haunting some years ago when I was given documents to look at, and it seemed to me that this is what was going on. They might have literally taken over the community, as I think they did in the remote past. And there was some evidence that these were old spirits, had been in the area for centuries. This is what they said, and had been involved with the local Native Americans, who were rather mysterious, the mound builders and all this. This is all in the book. But and then number 2, if you don't mind me rattling on here, is in the multiversal point of view, is the issue of somebody, perhaps with technology, stumbling in, perhaps across by chance or design, across one of these membranes from a parallel reality. And again, these are very concrete and physical, in our belief, most of them anyway. And what do we have from that? Instead of the theology of demons, we have ancient astronaut theory. What else could they be but people from other planets? And again, maybe they were. That's entirely possible too. Maybe they got here by means of the multiverse, the easiest way to travel. And but then again, they may have come in from somewhere or someone else. As Ben will tell you too. I'm sorry, Ben. I don't want to step on your lines here, but
no, it's okay. You're doing great.
No, but you've got the issue of how would you time travel? And if you talk to there are 2 physicists I know who would say, well, you don't travel. It's just that you're on the right track, because you don't travel back and forth in time. You travel from side to side.
Thank you.
See? Yes. And so, again, the parallel worlds, past and future, not really existing and all being simultaneous. This can be controlled, or it can be misstepped by accident. That's why people disappear and reappear. And all this stuff we get into. So I think that those 2 aspects we touch on, I think, in that first chapter, may be parasites and people stumbling or traveling from one parallel reality to the other, and not the air being enough that doesn't have alien microbes in it, and all sorts of factors lining up, so that our remote ancestors were in some cases brutally affected by some of the technology. I'm sure you're all familiar with Mohenjo-Daro. It's a city ruins now in Pakistan, and a friend of mine was there and took some pictures for me and did some research, and there is what appears to be like a ground zero. I mean, this is as real as it gets. This is not some kind of nutty stuff you'd see on the cable channels. There was heat fused green glass sand from the desert that had been heat fused. And the only thing that can do that is either a comet strike, which would have been, totally obvious even at this point in history, or a nuclear explosion. And there was evidence that the buildings in the center of the city had melted. And we're talking several thousand years in the past. Skeletons are not buried. They're haphazardly scattered around and are very radioactive. Somebody thought to bring a Geiger counter. Very radioactive and not in any natural way. There's a certain amount of radiation in the environment naturally, but this is way off the scale. So I think we may be dealing with the origins, the grain of sand in a way that created the whole idea of the wars of the gods, which are prevalent in the Bible too. That Satan, Lucifer being thrown out of heaven. It's all wars of the gods. Ben mentioned the Mahabharata, the very lengthy, it's the longest poem in the world, as a matter of fact, the national poem of India. And Ben, you tell him about the Vimana.
Oh yeah, good friend of mine. He was in my groomsmen party. He's from Southeast India, and he was telling me that they had a word for planes before planes existed, which was Vimana.
Yeah, and so it's mentioned in the Mahabharata with lots of Indian religious art with ships in the sky, and the weapons that they describe are chilling. There were each of the gods or whoever they were had his or her own weapon. There was the Brahmanastra, and which were thought-based weapons, and there is little doubt that the worst of these weapons was nuclear. Just the descriptions are stunning. They describe a nuclear explosion, the air turning bad, the food being contaminated, birds falling from the sky, even the colors turning white, and all this business. It's amazing, and this just seems to be something that I think we really can't ignore. If you take out the imagery, the religious imagery, and some of the flowery stuff in these documents, it comes out, and not only wars of the gods, but that we get into the Garden of Eden, as we call it, which I think was in Lebanon. There's even a town called Ekden to this day. Evidence of ridiculously ancient canals and agricultural activity, and evidence from particularly the Karsag epics of the Sumerians puts this very vividly, that the Nin Karsag, the mother goddess, took blood and saliva from one of her people and blended it with those of the natives. This is genetic engineering, and it's right there, written 4,000 years ago.
It was either that or the worst smoothie.
I would think so. I wouldn't drink. So anyway, these are all. This is how we look at it. Maybe we're wrong, but we present it in the book this way.
Well, it's real interesting reading. I can guarantee that.
It's talking about subjects that we don't usually touch upon in the paranormal community. But when you're talking about Mohenjo-Daro, I was thinking of the abandoned cities of central South America, because the Aztecs and the Olmecs constantly built these huge pyramids, and the step pyramids. They're not going to be the pyramids like you see in Giza, but these large pyramid cities, they'd be there only maybe a decade, and then they would drop it and move on. Yeah. And when you excavate underneath these step pyramids, they find hundreds of corpses. Mm-hmm. And it just, when I was reading through that, that's what I was thinking. And I'm like, I wonder how much study has been done. I know classic archaeologists have been going through it, but how many paranormal researchers have looked at it and tried to find stuff? So it got me thinking, and I like that.
Well, that's good. That's what we tried to do. How about?
Yeah.
If you go to the British Museum in London, or at least when I was there were two galleries. One has like the nice gods, like Isis and Osiris and all these people. And then the other one has these really nasty backyard things, deities that really were ugly and really don't. How could you love these? Because a lot of these religions weren't necessarily based on love, because they were nature deities. There was the bad, the dark side of nature too that was reflected. But some of these were so negative, and they demanded human sacrifice, such as the Aztecs did. And whether these were sacrificial victims found, as you mentioned, is probable. However, the whole idea that these gods would demand such sacrifice, I mean, who would even think of that? You know, what's the most precious thing to us? It's self-preservation and the really the sanctity of life, and particularly when it comes to our own. You know, so it just added up, at least to us, as parasites, again, operating, making people think they were gods and feeding off the result. Think of the power of the negativity of a human sacrifice or war, battlefield. So we still do the same thing, really, you know. And I don't know. And I'm a veteran myself. I have every respect, you know. But I mean, it's really the same scenario that the parasites may have prompted us to set up. I mean, again, not to get nuts here, but I think there was a serious influence there, and it's still going on. So all the archaeology, in a way, can point to much of what we say here.
Yeah.
Almost makes you wonder if that's where the vampire myth came from.
I think it's precisely where it came from. What did the ancient Sumerians call these things? They were life-sucking ghosts. And that's precisely what parasites are. You see people ending up with chronic fatigue syndrome and other diseases. And another thing I'd like to see, Kat, particularly, is someone who's a lot more competent than we are, investigating the health effects of paranormal exposure and activity.
Oh, yeah, that would be a really good topic. Because I know so many people who have health issues and then they leave for a while and then they come back and they surge up again. And also, don't forget hungry ghosts and ghouls. I know there are a bunch of them. They act a lot like vampires, but that are in Asian folklore.
Yes.
So, yeah, and that's my
hungry and
term.
hostile.
Hungry
Right.
and hostile. Yes, and very, very mean. But
the incubi and succubi as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's those kind of monsters and ghouls are very interesting. I love studying them. But Henry is reminding us that it is break time.
Break time. Yes.
It's break time.
Yeah.
And I know that I want to continue the discussion, especially on one particular case study that you had, Paul, back in the 1970s. And I'm also curious about shadow people and the Hat Man and how they could be all tied to this.
And I'm curious how you were able to let the end of the movie version of the Bell Witch be as it was, and just want to make me smack the filmmakers.
Nobody listens.
I've never seen it. I don't.
And I'm sure Barbara has a ton of questions also. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to let who gets to take us out? Kat takes us out?
I'll take us out
I'll bring
again.
us back, I guess, maybe. All right, go ahead.
Okay, everyone, we are listening to the Paranormal View on the ParaX radio network. This is Kat Cloco, Henry Foister, Jeffrey Gould, and Barbara Duncan. And tonight our guests are Paul and Ben Eno, the radio show hosts of Behind the Paranormal radio show, and also the authors of Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong. And we'll be right back after these messages.
From the author of the Ghost of Hollywood series and Workplace Spells comes a book for all lovers of pets, Animal Spells and Magic by Marla Brooks. Learn how to choose your next pet according to their astrological sign. Explore animal superstitions. Learn 25 magic spells for your pets and get instructions on creating your own spells. Learn who to call upon and what to use to cast these spells. Includes special chapters by Reverend Tim Shaw, Psychic to the Stars Kenny Kingston, Psychic Medium Victoria Gross, Animal Communicator Dinah Roseberry, and Shaman Willie Windwalker Gibson. This is the perfect book for all animal lovers. Animal Spells and Magic by Marla Brooks. For details on how to get your copy of this amazing new book, go to www.schifferbooks.com or check out Marla Brooks online at www.marlabrooks.com. This would make the perfect gift for the animal lover in your life. Go to www.schifferbooks.com or ask about it at your local bookstore.
Hi, this is Mike from Mr. G's Ice Cream Store in Gettysburg, the most haunted ice cream store in town. Stop in and see us next time you're around. We feature 16 flavors of homemade ice cream made right here in the store. Look forward to seeing you.
Tim, around here at Para-X, we're considered oldies because we've been here so long, right?
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with oldies. In fact, you know what? I really love oldies.
Well, yeah, me too. I mean, it kind of takes me back to a time when my cauldron had training wheels and the Black Cat Lounge was called the Black Kitten Lounge. Sometimes I miss the good old days.
Sis, there's no need to miss them at all, because all you'll have to do is turn on and listen to Rock with the Shock.
Rock with the Who?
No, little sis. No, not the Who. The Shock.
Hi, I am John Zaffis, and you are listening to Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network.
In order for the light to shine so brightly, the darkness must be present. Tune in every Monday at 10 o'clock for Dark Sun Rising on the Para-X Radio Network.
My name is Greg Bakken. I'm a writer, a producer, and a paranormal investigator. My favorite way of communicating with spirits is through using the spirit box, also known as a ghost box. I invite you to listen to me every Wednesday at 10 p.m. Central for interviews with people in the paranormal community and beyond. Plus, I will also include as much of my spirit box evidence as I can during my show. My name is Greg. Can you say Greg? Can you say Jeff? Greg. Jeff. Join me every Wednesday at 10 p.m. Central Time for Minnesota Ghost Box, only on Para-X Radio.
Para-X Radio presents Real Persons of Genius.
Real Persons of Genius.
Today, we salute you, Mr. and Mrs. Para-X show hosts.
Mr. and Mrs. Para-X show hosts.
Armed with nothing more than a laptop and a microphone, you hit the air to scare the bejesus out of your audience.
What the hell was that noise?
Like a dog peeing on a fire hydrant, you always whet our appetite for more.
I just can't get enough.
Whether it's witches, ghosts, fairies, or Bigfoot, we admire your ability to set aside reality and believe anything anyone tells you.
Seek professional help.
So the next time you're kneeling in front of your 8x10 glossy of Dave and Tom lighting a candle, remember, if it wasn't for you, I might be able to sleep without the lights on.
Mr. and Mrs. Para-X show hosts.
Para-X Radio Network, powered by CBS.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. Want to thank everybody for being here tonight, those in the chat room and those from around the world. And if you are listening from somewhere other than here, feel free to come over to para-x.com, click on the live chat button. You'll be in with all these wonderful people and interact with them and with us and ask questions of our guests. And want to welcome back Ben and Paul Eno.
Thank you, Henry.
All right.
Thank you.
And we got Kat Cloco.
Hi.
And we have Jeffrey Gould.
Hello.
And Barbara Duncan.
Still here and still getting rained on.
And speaking of those listening from somewhere other than here in the chat room, we have listeners from all around the world. Is that right, Barbara?
Yes, we do. We got listeners in the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Singapore, Austria.
Austria. Oh, all right.
Costa Rica, and Unknown is back.
Wow. They're listening from the dark side of the moon, aren't they?
Happy New Year, Unknown.
Pink Floyd listening.
So that's a lot of people. There's some new ones that's in there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate it.
Hi, Austria.
Well, we're having...
You can't see me, but I'm waving.
No, you are, huh? the snow's blinding them. So we're having a great discussion here with Paul and Ben's book. I guess, Kat, you've got some questions, and I know Barbara's chomping at the bit with questions. So why don't you guys go ahead and get started?
Well, we got some questions from our chat room that
Really?
I think we can cover first. Yes,
let's
we've
do
got
them
three.
then.
There was another one that popped up during the break. And the first one comes from Sherry, and she asks, can people see into the other worlds or timelines?
Ben?
Well, I guess I'll take this one because you talked for like 45 minutes. So, I guess going along the timeline, pardon the pun, of history, we see that the holy people, or the shamans, who still exist in most indigenous cultures today, and even in the First Nations or Native Americans here in North America, the shamans are the ones who were sort of like, well, the spiritual leaders and such of, tribes, and they would be able to reach into other worlds and grab things from other worlds and bring them here. As my father would tell you after meeting an Aboriginal elder and having a conversation with him for about, what was it, like 6 hours?
Nearly 7 in Australia.
Close.
Yeah.
I was close. Back when you were gallivanting around the world on your many adventures. Talking with Mindalui and sort of expulging his theories to this old man. And the old man responded with, "Oh, well, yeah, you're close with the multiverse theory. It's sort of what we shamans do. Like, if somebody has cancer, you get together, you reach into another world where the guy doesn't have cancer, and you sort of collapse the wave functions and bring the two worlds together to be able to make it so this man no longer has cancer." And there's all sorts of other examples of this. If you ever get a chance to talk to any Native American shamans, they will tell you this. Whether it's the Cree Indians up in Canada or pretty much anybody. I once had a shaman mentor myself by the name of Ruben, and he was a great guy. And I learned a lot from him, and he would make vague mentions of this whenever we had our sort of training sessions. And it was, there's a lot of that going on, and even then people can see into it at all times anyway, because we're always a part of it and we're always experiencing it every day. It's like if you put down your car keys, you turn around and they're gone, you're like, oh, well, it's one of those things. Well, in some world, the car keys were there, and in another world where you may have happened to pass into, the car keys are somewhere else in your house, or there's no car at all.
So just the way you indicated with the healer, the shaman, it's sort of like he sort of when you say he sort of melds the two dimensions, is it sort of like he's almost doing a metaphysical Venn diagram so that the middle part is where the two are balanced, and when they're separated, both are equal or balanced?
Essentially, yeah. Or maybe you're thinking too much about it, or maybe I'm not thinking enough about it. No, it's understandable. I feel the same way. Well, I mean, a physicist would look at it like collapsing a wave function, essentially, where you bring the two waves together and they disappear. You collapse the wave function.
Okay, so it just in my brain, because like I say, I'm a huge Doctor Who fan and science fiction fan. My brain does try and overthink things. So it's almost like it's creating a new frequency when it collapses a wave.
It's more like I want to say like weaving the two frequencies together.
Essentially,
okay.
Yes.
That's what I said.
Jeff, let's put another sci-fi spin on it here.
Woo-hoo.
Maybe it's like getting in the transporter, having that filter out the bad stuff, so that you end up with two beings that are identical.
True, but that's opening a whole can of worms of the concept of is what you beam out the same thing that beamed in, or is it?
Well,
facsimile?
I agree with Ben. I think we're overanalyzing something that probably we don't have the technology or the experience to understand yet.
Well, I mean, it takes the fun out of it if you can't think about it.
True. Well, my first metaphysics teacher said that magic is simply the manipulation of reality in a way that cannot be measured by science yet.
That's actually a pretty good way of putting it. A friend of ours, Mark D'Antonio, would also say that it could be undiscovered science.
Yeah.
And even Arthur C. Clarke said that magic is indistinguishable from science.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Oh, no, I did just one thought. One might draw parallels between magic and prayer as well.
Oh, yeah, Catholics do more magic than witches.
Well, yeah, from a certain point of view, yes.
Yeah, anytime they pray to deity, they're working a spell, and it either works or it doesn't. Or as my favorite quote from the movie Oh God is when one of the questions that George Burns was given was, do you answer prayers? He says, I answer all prayers. Sometimes the answer is no.
Yeah. And he was 120 when he said
it. Well, we have a second question from the chat room, and this one's from Kat. No relation to me, but she's still awesome. What if angels feed on positive energy?
All right, I'll take that one. That's a good question. But, I mean, I would expand it to say, okay, there are plenty of bad people, for lack of a better term, or negative people who feed upon negative energy. As not everybody is good. I hate to say that because I'd like to say that, but I always, Ben will tell you, I always try to find the good in people, but sometimes it's difficult. People can be good. So I think that angels, don't we feed on positive energy? I mean, don't we feel uplifted and stronger sometimes when we deal with a positive person? And I think, sure, angels would feed on positive energy. I don't think they would die if they didn't, but I mean, perhaps the question has no meaning. I mean, the very environment they seem to create for themselves is very positive. But there's a further question: what do you mean by an angel? I think we've talked about parasites. There's a question about parasites as an aside that people say. I often get, and Ben too, that could these be people who were totally consuming of others and totally self-centered, who maybe become parasites, or are, I should more accurately, are parasites in parallel realities where they are now influencing this one. I don't have any problem with that philosophically or our science, such as it is, but I've never really seen that unless there seem to be 9 or so different species of these parasites, and none of them seem to be humans or really connected with a recent foray into this world as a human. Although all things being parallel and all things being simultaneous, who knows what the connection may be? There may be connections we don't suspect. So the same thing with angels. But the thing that really is the key to maybe approaching an answer to this question is something that Ben and I both have found, and that's that we exist in many versions of ourselves in this multiverse. And in fact, the multiverse is not only an elegant interaction of all possibilities, they're all possibilities of us too. And the illustration I always use is I like to speak at colleges because not only, I don't get any dumb questions. I mean, the only question that's dumb is the one that is not asked. So I didn't mean to say that, but I get really, really good questions. And at the end, they put me in some kind of big armchair or something. And once I had a rocking chair, and the kids come up and they all tell me their stories like I was Santa Claus or something. So there were 2 freshman girls at Mount Ida College near Boston, and this is some years ago. I was speaking there long before Ben had the pleasure of my company in this. But there were 2 freshman girls, and I got a kick out of it because half the students at Mount Ida are studying to be undertakers. I thought that was nifty. And 2 freshman girls came up to me and said, and I've been talking about human relationships in the multiverse. I said, why is it that we had never seen each other before? But from day one, registration day, we saw each other and we were sisters from that moment. And they had been tremendous friends ever since. They said, why is that? I said, well, probably because at some point in the multiverse, at some time, place, or whatever, you literally are one another. Because all possibilities exist. At some point, you are each other. And this illustrates what we call the unity with a capital U. This is foreshadowed in a way perhaps by the African idea of Ubuntu, the African notion of justice. Everything you do affects me, everything I do affects you, and we are each other, effectively. The Gospel of Matthew, Henry. One of the mistranslations from Greek, in my opinion, is the most, everybody knows this one, love your neighbor as yourself. All of us, especially in the West, with our island theory that everything is about us, would say, well, love your neighbor the way you love yourself. That's not what it says in Greek. It says, if you translate it properly, it says, love your neighbor because he is yourself. Big difference. So again, all hints of the unity from our remote past, and here it is too from this. So the angels are part of that. So whatever angels may be, guardians, certainly anyone who serves the good, serves God, guardians, some of the angels may be versions of ourselves from what term do the New Agers use? Our higher selves or more enlightened selves. That could be literally real. Versions of ourselves who help ourselves from parallel realities where the awareness is greater or whatever, and then because it's all us. So again, all these possibilities are, I think, rather cool. And what did Alexander Leake say in the Mothman Prophecies? Everything you want to know is in the book.
Hey, I was going to just kind of go off of what Kat was saying, and instead of using angels feeding on positive energy, maybe they just get a boost.
Yeah, I think we do. Why should they?
Yeah, I think that would be more of what happens. And I have a ghost story about something that happened during a good family event, but I'll share that a little bit later.
Ooh.
Yeah, anyway, but okay.
Do we have anything else? More questions from the chat room?
There was one more, and it also comes from Sherry, who asked the first question, and she says, "What do they think about tulpas?"
Oh, interesting.
Ooh, tulpas are fun, aren't they?
Ben,
Oh yeah, great to have at a party.
Not necessarily.
Everybody's favorite neighborhood tulpa.
Yeah.
So tulpas are really interesting because it illustrates two things, in my opinion, at least. It illustrates the power of belief, and it also illustrates a very interesting portion of the multiverse, which is, something like that could indeed exist. And for those who don't know what a tulpa is essentially a being that is created through immense thought and concentration practiced by the Tibetan Buddhists. And it's really interesting how I've heard and read a lot of stories, well-documented events, people creating beings that they have specific purposes. Like a bunch of college students, I think, I can't remember where I read this, they sat and they created a tulpa, and they gave it a name, an identity, and a backstory, and it started, I think it was given a bunch of different tasks, like cleaning and stuff, and then eventually it sort of took on a life of its own and then ended up turning into a poltergeist, which is even more interesting.
That was in Canada in the 70s, and I knew some of those students.
Oh yeah, that's right. So you're probably more qualified to talk about it than I.
You got it.
Oh well, essentially, I don't know. It's really interesting because it could illustrate that these beings are indeed alive in somewhere, somewhen in the multiverse, and we just happen to bring those worlds over to us through immense concentration, or it could be sort of a parasite taking over the reins or whatever of whatever traits we bestow upon it. Much like Gnostic archons, we sort of give power to these things through our belief and concentration and how we think about things. A lot of the stuff that I've found and my father have found, it's usually about perspective.
So like in a holographic universe, we could be the tulpa.
Well, that's it. And we get into a little bit of the holographic idea in the book as well. We think that the multiverse approach, the MWI, and the holographic approach are really probably two sides of the same coin, or two ways of interpreting the similar phenomena that at least that we've seen. Maybe we're wrong, but that's how we approach it. But with the tulpas, you see, the ones that I've run into, and I think I ran into the first one in 1975, were a lot of parasitical overtones to them. Now, maybe some of them are not, but the very idea when you, as Ben described, when students assign an identity to something and it takes on that identity, it illustrates very vividly something that we believe. It's not really places that are haunted as such. It's people, and again, these things will be whatever they think will get, if they're parasitical, whatever will push the buttons in you. So a loved one or whatever. And again, that's hence our idea that nothing in the paranormal is what it appears to be. And Henry, since we're talking about the Bible, you get back to, the idea in the epistle of old man here, I think, John. It's the letter to John. Do not trust every spirit. In Greek, it says, do not believe every spirit. Okay. Right. And I think, again, even our remote ancestors knew that something strange in the neighborhood is it's a lot stranger than it may appear to be. And don't trust it. Same thing, with all areas of the paranormal, aliens, you just can't trust that kind of thing. So, again, it's a matter of taking it from as broad a perspective as possible, and as Ben said, and how things are perceived and interpreted.
That's a good point, Paul. If you could talk about this a bit, because there are biblical references, and people do cite that all spirits are demons.
Well, no, exactly. That's not what we believe, or nor do we believe that all spirits are parasites. But again, the whole notion of spirit is called into question, I think, by the whole multiverse idea. And I think in a way, Ben answered this when we were answering that first question from the chat room. When you see across the boundaries or whatever, and as the shamans do, and that whole idea, I think when you see, again, an ancestor, leaping down the hallway happily, and that they're dead. They're dead here, perhaps, whatever death may mean. It really has no meaning in the multiverse, but they're not dead in many, many other places and times in the multiverse. And why do we see certain things? Why are they wearing clothes? Why are they driving cars sometimes? Why are they doing physical things? Because we think they are physical. You're seeing a moment in their lives. They may or may not be aware of you. And I think that's essentially what it's all about. When there is communication, that's when the red flags go up, and there certainly can be. We can communicate with ourselves from parallel realities. There are apparitions, there are crisis apparitions, things that are perfectly legitimate, that may certainly arise out of love, of our own blood, this kind of thing, our own people. Or even total strangers. So anything is possible and does exist out there in the multiverse. But again, I think it's a matter of being very discriminating in how you interpret things and how you see them and how you react to them. There are times when you shouldn't have anything to do with them and should, in a way, we ignore many of these things. So it's, I don't know if I've answered your question, Barbara, but it's a matter of taking each case individually and working through it very cautiously. And this is one reason why we cringe when we see some of these ghost shows on TV. Now, when I started out in the 70s and got involved with Ed and Lorraine Warren, Lorraine read something I wrote about my first case, which I thought was going to be purgatory and was nothing of the kind. Nobody was doing this. Hence Holzer, some of the first generation legends, them, and then on the parapsychology side, Louisa Rhine, and a couple of priests. But generally, you didn't have hobbyist ghost hunters going out treating this like this was butterfly collecting or bird watching, which is an extremely reckless and dangerous thing to do. You didn't see that. But now you've got all these shows encouraging people to do this, and they have no idea about the concepts we're talking about tonight. And if we're right, they could be in serious jeopardy by misinterpreting these things and assuming that they are what they appear to be.
Now, I've actually heard Hans Holzer speak and Ed and Lorraine Warren. Were you with them when they were? Well, you're back east. I'm from New Jersey originally. I actually heard Ed and Lorraine speak at Montclair State College. Were you involved with them around that time? Do you know, or I think it was the late 70s.
I was involved with them from 72 to 78. And I was almost involved with Amityville, but my seminary schedules, I was at the other end of New York, and Lorraine would write me letters telling me about the case. Now, that was interesting. But, in early 78, there was a case, ironically, here in Rhode Island, down in Newport, or Middletown, actually, where they were doing some things that I just began to wonder. There were things... I loved them personally. We had they were like second parents to me, especially having lost my father so young. Ed was like a father to me, but I couldn't be blind to some of the things that I thought were wrong. In the Bridgeport poltergeist case, for example, I would report something to Ed, and he'd go out and talk to the press. And ironically, when they threw me out of the seminary, I ended up a journalist for the last 35 years. The last thing I would do was call in anybody from the media. And he didn't get it quite right sometimes when he reported it to them. And whether that was accidental or intentional, I don't know. But I like to think the best of them. But I questioned them in 1978, and I dared to question the gods of paranormal research. So we had an amicable but permanent, congé there. We split, and we had a peace conference in an ice cream shop, and that was the end of that. And I never heard anything else. I know John Zaffis. He was on our show recently, as a matter of fact, a wonderful fella. But I haven't seen Lorraine since.
It's a shame he didn't break up at Mr. G's ice cream.
I was just thinking that.
Well, we wouldn't have broken up.
Yeah.
Though he had taste for sweets, we'd probably still be there.
Well,
wow.
Our time is going to go right on by after we take our last break. And there's a lot that we want to try and get in that we're not going to get in, because I know Kat's got some other things that she's wanting to talk about, and so does Barbara. And I like some of the things that Barbara's got too, because I think some of those questions are fascinating. And it's interesting when I hear stories like that, because it makes me want to go out there and look for some of these places. So,
well, this conversation makes me want to put on a pot of coffee and talk to you guys all night.
Yes. Actually, I've done that. The coffee is brewed.
Well, mine's sitting here in the cup cold, and I need some more hot coffee. But anyway, I think what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and take a quick last break. And then when we come back, we will get started with a whole lot more of this fascinating book, which I think everybody ought to get a copy of. It's very interesting and very thought-provoking, and there's a lot in there that you probably haven't thought of or heard of. So we'll find out where you can get those books at in a little bit later. So let's see, who's taking us out? Barbara, you taking us out, or Jeff?
No, Jeff still has the deficit.
Yeah, Henry's still writing 2016 on his checks. Yeah. You're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with hosts Henry Foister, Kat Cloco, Ceiling Cat Barbara Duncan, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with tonight's awesome guests, authors, and investigators, Paul and Ben Eno. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.
It's always time for the dead to shine in Hollywood. The legendary Dearly Departed Tours has stepped up their ghostly game by offering the Hollywood Ghosts and Legends Walking Tour. Dearly Departed has long been an orb of hope in the paranormal world, having been featured on television's Haunted History and Haunted Collector. Their terrible tales have been made infamous in Marla Brooks' The Ghosts of Hollywood books. The new Ghosts and Legends Tour is a 10-block, 70-minute dusk-time stroll down the boulevard of broken dreams. You'll be guided through the golden age of Hollywood and see where the unearthly Bela Lugosi, Lon Chaney, and the calamitous Black Dahlia are still said to linger. You'll see Hollywood's Gothic hotels, legendary theaters, and restaurants, never forgetting their permanent occupants. No stranger to investigations, Dearly Departed Tours has first-hand knowledge of some of these hauntings. For details of the Hollywood Ghosts and Legends Walking Tour, find Dearly Departed Tours on Facebook, dearlydepartedtours.com, or call 1-855-600-DEAD.
My name is Greg Bakken. I'm a writer, a producer, and a paranormal investigator. My favorite way of communicating with spirits is through using the spirit box, also known as a ghost box. I invite you to listen to me every Wednesday at 10 p.m. Central for interviews with people in the paranormal community and beyond. Plus, I will also include as much of my spirit box evidence as I can during my show.
My name is Greg. Can you say Greg? Can you say Jeff? Greg. Jeff.
Join me every Wednesday at 10 p.m. Central Time for Minnesota Ghost Box. only on ParaX Radio.
There's a darkness in the hallway. Voices that seem to come from nowhere. Alone at night, there is a feeling that something or someone is near. Where can you go? Who can you turn to? ParaX Radio and the all-new ParaX Vision can help. Our knowledgeable host and expert guests can help you find some answers and take a glimpse into the unknown. ParaX Radio and ParaX Vision, programming for the open mind.
Yes! I found it at last! Marla's Sacred Cauldron. This is the legendary artifact that has been whispered about in hushed tones for hundreds of years, and now it's mine! All mine!
Who dares defile the sanctity of my castle walls? Step away from the cauldron, you impertinent, muddy-mettled maltworm.
Never! I've spent half my lifetime trying to discover your age-old secret of stirring the cauldron.
Oh, for Merlin's sake, that's no deep, dark secret. Just tune into the ParaX Radio Network Thursday nights at 9 o'clock Eastern for more cauldron stirring than you can shake a wand at.
Oh, well, in that case, I guess I don't need to take up any more of your time, so I guess I'll be going.
Not just yet. We've got a little unfinished business to take care of.
That's Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on the ParaX Radio Network.
Rat, where are you going?
I'm going back to the Paranormal View, back where I belong.
Please, take me with you.
No, I'm through with everything here. I want to see if there's something left in life I haven't explored. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, Rat, don't run to them. They talk about ghosts and hauntings, UFOs, and all kind of supernatural scary stuff.
You'll never understand, will you, Scarlet?
No.
Well, that's your misfortune.
Rat, if you go, where shall I go? What shall I do?
Frankly, my dear. Line.
Oh, you gotta be kidding.
That's the Paranormal View with your host, Henry Foister, Jeffrey Gould, Kat Cloco, and Barbara Duncan. Every Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the ParaX Radio Network.
They're creepy and they're kooky, mysterious and spooky. They all talk gobbledygooky, the ParaX family. The shows are paranormal, not stuffy but informal. The topics are abnormal, the ParaX family.
They're strange, deranged, unrestrained.
So grab your favorite brew, it's time to rendezvous as we give awards to the ParaX family.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. I want to thank everybody for being here listening tonight. Appreciate each and every one of you. And we have a full chat room, too. And, excuse me, and we have people listening from all around the world. And we're glad that they're here. If you do have questions tonight, you can send them to either Ceiling Cat, Jeffrey Gould, Cat co-host, or myself. We will get those questions answered for you. But if you have questions and you're listening from somewhere else, you can also send us a question to theparanormalview@gmail.com and just put attention question, and we will get those answered for you. With that, I want to welcome back Paul and Ben Eno.
Well,
Thank you, Henry.
for having us back.
Oh, you guys are a blast, I'm telling you. love the book and the stories and everything, which we're going to be getting into some of them. And I know what Kat's wanting to talk about. So why don't we do that first, and then we'll get into the stuff that Barbara's wanting to talk about, because I'm interested in that also. So, Kat?
So okay.
Yeah,
I'm curious what Barbara wants to talk about, because
she's wanting to talking about the disappearing towns and
oh yeah, that is good.
Yeah.
So I think first what we can talk about is chapter 4, which is ghosts, parasites, and poltergeists.
Sure.
Yeah, because that was a fascinating story, and one I did not know ever happened.
Do you mean the Bridgeport case of 1974?
Yeah, that Bridgeport case. I've heard of a lot of the older cases, or the ones that happened in the 70s that really predated, obviously, the pop ghost hunting, but I never heard of this particular case, so it was all new territory for me.
Oh, okay. It's funny. It's the subject of William J. Hall's 2014 book, The World's Most Haunted House. And I was there, and he found out things I never knew. He talked to the police officers and firefighters and things of this kind. And what it really is probably the best witnessed and best documented poltergeist case. So he says in history, and I'm not going to disagree with him. Ed and Lorraine Warren and myself and a Catholic priest by the name of Father Bill Charbonneau were involved in this in the height of the case. Later on, there was a fellow called Boyce Beatty and a team from what was then the Duke University Parapsychology Lab, North Carolina, who came into the house. But that was after most of the things had ended. But it was November 1974. And I was coming home from this. I was home from the seminary for Thanksgiving vacation, and I had been invited down. And Ed and Lorraine and I were great friends by that time. And Lorraine, a fantastic cook. You never want to miss a meal cooked by Lorraine Warren. So down I went to their house in Monroe, Connecticut, about 60 miles from where I lived in East Hartford, and they. I never got my dinner because she came flying out the door and said, "Are you in a high spiritual state right now?" And I was not by any means, but I said, of course I am. And so down we went to Bridgeport. I went with Ed, and she came later on with Father Bill Charbonneau, a priest of the Archdiocese of Hartford, whom I had not met before, but who somehow got away with investigating all this stuff because he was already ordained. It was, what could they do? So he, fine man, he ended up a general in the North Carolina National Guard ahead of the chaplain corps. So anyway, the family was a middle-aged couple with an adopted 10-year-old daughter. And that was it. Very, very small house, really just 3 rooms. And people see it today and say, how could all these things have happened in there? Well, I can assure you that they did because I saw them myself. The sounds had begun, as they always do in poltergeist cases, as a sort of just a pounding or even a tapping. And then as people get more annoyed, frightened, or whatever, angry, the parasite, which we believe this is what poltergeists ultimately are, feed upon it and get so strong that all these other things can happen. So among the things that happened here were, I'll just tell you what happened when we walked into the house. For the first time, right behind us was Mrs. Gooden, the lady of the house, who television had said had flown at her and broken her toe, and she was just returning from the emergency room at the local hospital with her toe all bandaged up. The house was a mess. Police officers, and this is in the official reports, reported objects flying off the walls, things of this kind happening. I stood there shortly thereafter with 3 Bridgeport firefighters on one side of me, 3 Bridgeport police officers on the other, and we watched a refrigerator levitate in the kitchen. It was huge, had to be 300 pounds, and then gently set itself back down again. The dresser in the girls' room flew across the room, hit the wall. Everything was moving, and the police officers said that in one of the reports, everything was moving. Among the more dramatic things that happened to me was I was there for the better part of 3 days with the Warrens, and that was this is a Sunday, November 24th. This began for us, And then November 25th, Monday night, the Warrens had left to be on some TV show, and I was in the house alone with the family, a reporter, and a neighbor. And again, we were assuming these were demons. The Warrens have always been very big on the whole demon thing, which is why they worked with priests, and sometimes priests who were not recognized by this, but that's another story. So we were assuming these were demons, and the Roman Catholics have a very strict and institutionalized version of exorcism. We're literally waiting for the Bishop of Bridgeport to give permission for Father Charbonneau to do an exorcism. That never came. Meanwhile, all this stuff was happening. So I'm in there assuming these are demons, but I got the impression, the very strong impression, there were 4 beings, 4 entities. And they suddenly came out of the girls' room, into the kitchen, down the hallway, and you could almost see these translucent, gauzy structures, okay? And one of them walked right up to me, and I put the little girl behind me because I knew it was after her. This thing, and the best word I can think to describe it, there are 2 words I can think to describe it. One is sterile, completely non-human. And the second word is alien. You can interpret that however you like. These were utterly alien beings. So meanwhile, this thing's standing in front of me, and I was starting to panic, and I began, and the trouble with that was that it began to feed on me. I pushed against it. It pushed back, and I felt a physical skeletal I felt bones, a physical structure. And I have when I lecture, I have when we lecture, I have an illustration of this. It's almost bird-like. Now, I'm no anatomist or biologist or anything, but it really, this is what it felt like. I was totally shocked because this is supposed to be a spirit, right? It got around me, threw the little girl across the room. The energy in this place, you could have held up a light bulb and it would have turned on. So I pulled the whole family out of the house. Fortunately, the police had cordoned off the ends of Lindley Street, of this block anyway of it. And we didn't walk out into the middle of a crowd because there were up to 2,000 people, police estimates, outside this house at any given time once this word of this got out. So there was that, and the refrigerator, and I was injured by a flying television set, rather nasty gash in my leg from this. And that TV came over. This was the previous night. It came over, slam onto the kitchen floor, and it should have been in a million pieces, but it was unharmed. And that started me developing a theory of why these things may be happening in a house where poltergeists are involved, but that the poltergeists themselves are not actually doing at least a lot of these physical movement of objects. So that's kind of another theory. But that was the Bridgeport case of 1974, and there's a section of this chapter 4 on that case, and also Bill Hall's very excellent book. You ought to have him on your show. World's Most Haunted House. So that was it. There was plenty more if you want to hear it, but Bill Hall went out and he found he located actual witnesses, because I was one of the few surviving witnesses to this, because Ed Warren passed, or as we say, translated in 2010. Lorraine is still around, but she's very, very elderly. There were a couple of the police officers that Bill Hall found and who talked, and none of them has ever retracted their story. I remember one of them backing out of the house, backing down the sidewalk, and sitting in the police cruiser and refusing to come out. There was another, I did a book signing in 1998 when my book Footsteps in the Attic, I should say Faces at the Window, came out at this Barnes & Noble in Warwick, Cat, I'm sure you know it well. And a woman came up to me and said, my father was a Bridgeport firefighter during that case. We couldn't find him for 3 days. And I said, well, where was he? And he was in the apartment above their garage. He was so frightened by what he saw in this house. I believe he was one of the ones standing at my side when this refrigerator flew away. And he said he was so frightened he wouldn't come out of this place. He just was traumatized. It changed his life. Because, especially first responders tend to be very, especially police officers, very practical, feet on the ground people. This is the way it is. And, when this happens to you, and I've seen this happen to professionals, it's just they are never the same again. Because their world is shattered. The comfortable world we live in that we think we understand, where we think we know things and everything is wrong, then it really rocks your world. So that was the Bridgeport case of 1974. It ended in chaos because we were thrown out. The police came in as soon as we left on Tuesday. We left temporarily, and the city was tied up. And Bridgeport is not a small town; it's the largest city in Connecticut, and it was tied up in knots because people all over the world knew about this, and it was nuts. So they moved in, said the kid did it. That's all there was to it, and there's a lot more to it. But Ed Warren and I went on the radio and fought with the police for 3 nights, the better part of 3 nights on the air, and. Then I went home and finally got at least a Thanksgiving dinner that week. So
all told, it ends well, I guess.
Yeah, I was wondering about the Thanksgiving because I'm reading the dates and it's ticking closer to Thanksgiving. And I'm like, I wonder what they did there. Random thought.
This was a Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Well, we didn't eat a lot. Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday that we were in that house. Tuesday we were thrown out. Tuesday night and Wednesday night we were on the radio, and Thursday I went home and had dinner with my family.
So did they move back into the house, or what happened to the house?
Well, the house, they stayed in the house for a while. Things continued to happen, though not nearly on the scale they did when we were in there. Maybe it was our fault. I don't know. And the for sale sign eventually went up. But then the people from Duke showed up. That was Keith Harari and Jerry Solfin, who are now Dr. Keith and Dr. Jerry. And Jerry later wrote to me that there were so many eyewitnesses that they couldn't pin it all together, and they never even wrote an in-house report on it. So he told me anyway. And 40 years later, Bill Hall's book came out, and I met up with Boyce Beatty for the first time in 40 years. He had interviewed me after this. And the family apparently had the child had been taken to the Fairfield Hills Psychiatric Hospital or State Hospital, mercifully closed at this point in Connecticut. And supposedly things had happened there. It all depends who you talk to. It's a pretty good bet that the rumor about this is true, that Jerry Gooden had to sink the Christmas tree in concrete that year because it kept moving. And then shortly thereafter, a for sale sign appeared. The parents both passed away. Marcy herself passed away last year. Very sad, very sweet little girl, 10 years old at the time. And so a very sad story. She was a Native American, one of the First Nations from Canada, from Ontario, Iroquois, and had been adopted by the family. And anyway, long stories. But it ended. Some say it never did end, really, but it never got as bad as it was that one weekend. But again, it depends who you talk to.
So is the house still there? People live in it?
Yep. 966 Lindley Street. Huh. That's public record because it's in Bill's book now. But yeah, it's people are struck by the size. Supposedly outside, people saw there were 2 stone swans on the doorstep that supposedly moved, and I never saw that. I've heard of things like that. There was supposedly a talking cat involved. Now, my job, Ed Warren assigned me to watch the little girl just to make sure she wasn't doing any of this stuff. And she had this cat with her named Sam, and it was absolutely clear to me that she would hold Sam close to her throat and do kind of like a ventriloquism thing. She was rather good at it. But this was close enough to New York for network reporters from ABC, CBS, and NBC, the only networks at the time, to come up, and I will never forget the sight of these network guys standing around holding microphones up to this cat and begging it to say something. And I mean, it's reminiscent of modern journalism in a way. There's sometimes I'm ashamed of my profession, but I became a journalist. I've never asked a cat to talk as far as I can recall.
Plus, mostly what it would say is, "Where's the food?"
Precisely, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, Jerry Gooden, who was no fool, and his feet were very firmly planted on the ground, in my opinion. He swore that the cat would be in the cellar, would come up, pound on the door, and demand, in sailors' talk, so to speak, curse the air blue and demand to be let out. Now this gets back in a way maybe to the tulpa idea. Can animals be quote unquote possessed? And we deal a little bit with exorcism and stuff in the book, and I was involved in some cases when I was in the seminary. But the question of animal possession arises, and the whole tulpa thing. So I don't know. He swore the cat talked. He said it had been in the veterinary hospital for an operation, had not talked before that. But what he said was quote, "I swear the damn thing swallowed a mynah bird." When it was at the, so I know, but I never heard anything I thought was the talking cat. But those reporters and Gooden's stories were food for thought, in my opinion. So there were a lot of things in this case, and the weirdest thing I'd seen up to that point.
Wow.
That's the place with the levitating refrigerator?
Yes. Yeah.
So it didn't matter what size of object, things were just coming up off the floor.
Well, looking back at that, knowing what I think Ben and I know now, looking back at that, I think we were certainly dealing with, I suppose, what Native Americans would call a thin place, or a place where these brains, BRANES, or membranes, as physicists would say, are very thin and movable. And I think we may have been standing in that kitchen at a moment where intersect points were running across that kitchen, were blending and things. And one of the things physicists who believe this will stress is that the laws of physics in these different worlds are themselves quite different. So there may be some worlds where this thing was weightless, and maybe one of those with appropriate laws of physics washed across that kitchen as we were standing there, and that's why it levitated. I never felt the presence, or very rarely at least, felt the presence of one of these entities when these objects were moving, which indicated to me later, once I thought about it, that these were not actually doing this. It's more like the metaphor I always use is when you move quickly along through an office or a hallway, maybe you will stir up the air and knock some papers off a table. That sort of thing. So the energies involved with the processes that allow these things to move between worlds may have moved the objects, as in the Hutchison effect, which is an interesting story in itself. But it's probably, I don't think it's really, in many cases anyway, the entities actually throwing things and doing the poltergeist thing as they are reputed to do. That's my opinion.
So sort of like an energy vortex like Sidonia or places like that have these crossing ley lines.
That's as good a way to put it as any.
Okay.
Okay, since we're down to, like 25 minutes, something like that, 26. Barbara, why don't you go ahead and talk about some of these places that keeps not being there?
Well, it goes back kind of to the vortexes and that membrane you're talking about, and the vanishing village and those stories was that aha moment for me, because I do a lot of cemetery photography, and I have a cemetery that I go to quite a bit, and I can drive that road one week, the next week come back and go, wait a minute, that stone wasn't there last time.
Mm-hmm.
Or wait a minute, this doesn't look like it did last week. And I look at the tombstones, and of course they're like 1926, so obviously they didn't go anywhere. But it's almost like they were vanishing at one point.
Yeah, well, Ben, I've been yakking here. Why don't you take this one?
Well, I mean, I like some of the stories that we have in there. One of my favorites is the I can't remember which go. There was a group of people. I want to say it was a husband and wife who were traveling throughout the American Southwest, which, as we all know, is home to many ghost towns. And one of the ones they decided to visit was a ghost town that everyone around the area was like, "Oh, no, that place doesn't exist. You won't find anything there. There's no town." So they were like, we saw it on a map. It would be right here. So they decided to take a little jaunt out there, and they drive in and they see the sign that says "Welcome." So it's like, okay, well, it's like German or Dutch or something. So they're driving through this town, and something's a little off. They stop to eat, and they find people are sort of looking at their car. They think it's all weird. They go into this restaurant. They find everything very cheaply, but it's written in a language they don't understand. So they sort of point at stuff that they want, and the waitstaff's like, I guess this is what they want. So they bring out their food, and they try to pay, and they pay with American currency, and they are just like, this is weird. Like, we shouldn't take. Like, they don't understand the currency and all that stuff. So somewhen, these two people crossed into a world where there was not a ghost town, but an actual town filled with Dutch for some reason.
Yeah, in
the middle,
Utah.
In Utah, of all places. And somewhen, there are graves that are at the cemetery that you are at, where they weren't there before, but you ended up in a world in which they are there now. It's like we had someone write into our show once, like, oh well, I've been driving the same road every day for like my entire life, and I drive by this green house every day, and then I drive by and I say, oh, it's red now. So the guy goes up to the owner of the house, and because he's known him for years, and he's like, oh well, when did you decide to paint the house? And the guy was like, what are you talking about? It's always been this color. Like that kind of stuff that happens all the time. Like I said before, it's like those little things that you don't notice, you just sort of dismiss it as one of those things. But it's actually us passing through different worlds at all times.
Yeah. So generally we refer to those as time slips.
Yeah, you could call it that, but again, it seems to be a space slip as well. That Utah case, now we didn't work on that personally. Many years ago, I was giving a talk to a group in Providence, Rhode Island, and the woman came up to me, and she and her husband were both retired bankers. I mean, they weren't your frivolous types of people. She had made copious notes about this experience, and they're the people this happened to, as Ben was describing, and she was shaken up, and and I'm sure any of you can back me up on this, that you get to the point where you can kind of, especially in journalism, you can get to the point where you can tell whether somebody's trying to throw bovine fecal matter or not. You get to the point where you can kind of tell whether at least they may believe what they're saying. At least they believe it, even if it's a little hard to believe itself, So that cut some ice with me, and that's why it's in the book. So we try to exercise some standards and have some kind of personal contact. If we haven't experienced the case ourselves in the book, we try to have personal contact with those who did, and that's why it's in there.
It makes you kind of want to go back to all the Bermuda Triangle stories and think, well, you know what, there may be a bit of truth to it, simply because there are those time slips.
Well, there's a lot of magnetic stuff and electrical stuff that can be cited as possible reasons or causes for this. When I was in the Bermuda Triangle serving with the U.S. Coast Guard in the 80s, there were a lot of strange things that happened in that area. Now, of course, from a practical standpoint, the area is very heavily traveled. There's a lot. It's one of the most heavily traveled air routes and marine routes in the world. So naturally, you're going to have more things happen. But I'm standing on the bridge of the cutter, and the Coast Guard, because it's a big ship, 378 we used to call it, 378 feet long. Most people never see these, but they're in some of the major ports. And they do long distance transoceanic stuff for the Coast Guard also. So it's a big ship. And I'm standing on the bridge, and all of a sudden the quartermaster yells, and I run over to the compass, and it's a big ship's military compass, so it's going around and around and around in circles. So the captain looks and says, "Oh, don't worry about it. It'll end, in a minute." So I said, "Well, that's a minute. We have no navigation. What the hell?" So, but it did, and I never saw it happen again. But there are all sorts of magnetic anomalies that I've seen for myself in the Triangle. Outside the port of San Juan, Puerto Rico, where we had some things to do, there was a U.S. Navy destroyer, and I had heard the story that there's so much UFO activity in the Mona Passage, which is the body of water out there, that the Navy keeps a ship there on station to keep an eye on it. Now, I don't know what the ship was doing there, but I did see it was a Spruance-class destroyer, which is a valuable ship, sitting there the whole time we were in port, and while we were coming and going. And we had no communication with the vessel, which was odd. There are certain communications that take place in ships in certain proximity. So that was strange. I talked to a member of the Puerto Rican legislature who lived in a house kind of up on the hills just south of the old city of San Juan. And he talked about a time he was out just several weeks before having a barbecue with his family. And this disc comes up out of the water, maybe 2 miles out, hovers for a minute, and then takes off like a shot into the sky. And he had never seen this sort of thing before, but other people had. So these are all things that I didn't put all these things in the book, but these are things that I've had personal experiences with in the Bermuda Triangle area. So something's going on.
Wow.
Oh yeah. What we were talking about in personal chat beforehand, and that is, places disappear. Why not people?
Oh, they do. and they appear as well. There were several cases. This is the 60s and 70s from the Tokyo airport in Tokyo, the international airport, where people would. This happened in 3 different cases that I know of. People would turn up with passports from countries that had never existed, at least not in our world. In one case, they couldn't tell the kind of textiles the person's clothes were made of. One of them spoke a language nobody had ever heard before. And this was really, so people appearing seemingly out of places or times that don't exist in our world. And all of them more or less came to bad ends. One jumped off a building, another one, nobody knows what happened to him. And then there are cases that people have told me about personally. I'm thinking of a case of the early 70s when a couple from four people from Scotland, 2 couples, were traveling in France, came upon a hotel that they had never, wasn't in any of the guidebooks, but they went and they were absolutely charmed by the old atmosphere, 19th century atmosphere. They parked their car across the street, but it was the only car they could see during the whole time. This is very interesting. They had meals there. That was all very charming. There was no electricity. There was no modern things that we would expect. In the morning, they came down, had a lovely breakfast, and 2 police officers were there, and they asked them where the motorway was, or the l'autoroute, as you'd say in French, and they had never heard the word before, or at least acted that way. They sort of pointed in the general direction of some town, and everything was strange. And then when they tried to use French, they were still using francs. This is before the euro. When they checked out, they were surprised they didn't have to pay up front, but when they checked out, they paid in French francs, and the guy had no problem taking them, which is interesting compared with that Utah case where the guy acted like he'd never seen American paper currency before. And I looked it up later, and the French franc had really not changed much since the 1870s. So it really hadn't changed much in the previous century to this case. So maybe that's the reason for that. They drove away. They said, let's stay there on the way back. So they found the road all right. But when they got there was no hotel. And people told them the place had long since been out of business and really was very prosperous in the late 19th century. So, I mean, I don't know. Again, these were very feet on the ground kind of people, not the sort of people to mess around with these sorts of things, and I just couldn't imagine why they would make up something like this. So this is a typical story that is heard. From our own experience, Ben and I both experienced this. Ben, I don't know if you remember, you were really little, but we moved to the house in Woonsocket, Rhode Island here, and we kind of explored. There was a lot of open space land behind it, and we went out to explore one day with 2 of Ben's cousins and a neighbor's dog who kind of followed us everywhere. And we came upon, in the middle of the woods, it's all wooded, this field filled with beautiful, beautiful yellow flowers. Ben, do you remember that?
I do remember that. I remember we couldn't find it ever again.
we couldn't. The dog led us home, and this is 30 acres, which is not enormous. And we've lived here it's 21 years this year, and I've walk up there a lot. I have never been able to find that field again. It's all just woods. So again, typical example, and we just say, well, it's one of those things, or you put the keys down and you turn around and they're gone, or they're at the other end of the table. Little glitches in the fabric of space-time, little glitches in the multiverse here, the membranes. But it's only when you go to Bridgeport and something is throwing TV sets at you that you really notice it and you can't explain it away is one of those things. So I think it's all part of the same scenario, and it's all part of the multiverse, and or the hologram. So I think these things happen every day. The ones that get reported are just the big ones.
So do you think that it's the area that's being affected and not necessarily the people that were involved in it?
Well, in a way, both. Ben, if you want to take that.
Well, I mean, we're participants in the phenomena. It's like saying you're standing outside your house and you see a glowing figure, and above it there's a flying saucer, and you say, "Ha-ha, an alien." Or you're inside your house and you see a glowing figure, and you say, "Aha, a ghost." Well, you see, we approach it with perspective. We participate in it. We can really determine how the phenomena sort of, what's the word?
How they manifest.
Manifest. That's a good word. I was trying to think of a pun, but I guess manifest works well as well. So it depends on, where you are, as in like if there's high water tables or like sandy soils or something like that. So the electromagnetics could conduct a lot of things, or it could also be, how we interact with phenomena itself. For example, if you live in a house that there's a lot of like goofy things that go on, or like you see like apparitions or something like that seem entirely normal, or like just little things happen, like little creatures you've never seen before just sort of appear. That's all well and good, but if Charles Manson moved in there, I can tell you that something horrible would probably happen immediately as he moved in. So really it depends on how we approach the phenomenon itself.
So, like a researcher would say, the observer is always part of the experiment.
I suppose, yeah, essentially.
Yes, absolutely. And that's quantum physics 101. The observer determines the reality, if you take Heisenberg's uncertainty principle to its logical or illogical conclusion. So, and also, when you have the flap areas, as we call them, that's our specialty really since in the past 12 years anyway, since the two of us have been working together. And the flaps, we've heard of UFO flaps and things like this, large sort of explosions of similar phenomena, UFOs in that case, taking place in the same area. But we've taken it, we see much more beyond that in the sense that all sorts of paranormal phenomena seem to occur if you just look for them. For example, in the Mothman case, very famous case in what the media dubbed Mothman, the strange creature chasing cars at 100 miles an hour and all this business, in the Ohio Valley of the U.S. in the mid to late 1960s. And if you look beyond that, there wasn't just this Mothman thing. There were men in black, there were UFOs, and we were down there in 2003 and talked to witnesses. And they would tell about glowing eyes under their couch or chair, almost like the tulpa thing. I've seen that in tulpa cases. Glowing eyes looking in their windows, footsteps on their roofs, strange people coming to the door dressed in Air Force uniforms, but the father maybe was a veteran and realized the guy was wearing the insignia wrong. You name it, it kind of took place in this area. And John Keel kind of looked into that and began to wonder about this whole multiverse idea and in another with other terminology, perhaps, with the same concept. So we investigate these flap areas, and these, we think, give an indication of lots of things crossing the membranes, not just disappearing buildings or Bigfoot or whatever. And we have a really hot case in Pennsylvania now, Western Pennsylvania, that Ben hasn't made it there yet, but he's coming on the next expedition. That we've done that. We did 2 trips there last year for a period of about 6 days. And then the middle of Connecticut, the Litchfield Triangle, as we call it, one of Ben's first cases. We've been working on it for 12 years. We do that. We work on cases for years. We don't just swoop in and swoop out, because there's always more to it, and it's not what it appears to be most of the time. So in the flap areas, you've got Bigfoot, you've got or something like that. You've got sometimes parasitical entities, shadow people. I know you wanted to ask about that, I think, Kat. And UFOs, the military. In every case we've investigated that it has to do with a flap area, the military shows up, or something that appears to be the military. People report, again, time slips, things that just are right, the Mandela effect, if you will. It all goes with the area, and I think a lot of it has to do with perhaps the energies, geotechnical factors lining up with people who are susceptible to being very aware of other universes. So in a way, Barbara, it's both the place and the person.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that in quantum physics, they find that quantum particles will react differently when being observed.
Yes.
And they talk about that, but they never bring up the fact, do they behave differently depending upon the mood of the observer?
Actually, that has been addressed, but there's no conclusion that I'm aware of. Okay. The real problem with using quantum physics to explain the paranormal is that there is a debate, mostly on the negative side, by physicists, that the quantum effects that we believe we see reflected in paranormal cases don't go beyond the not microscopic, but the subatomic level. Okay, the particles being waves, sometimes particles, other times time meaning nothing, effects taking place before the causes, particles being able to travel huge distances without traversing the space in between. But I just can't. There are other physicists who kind of keep their mouths shut, but with whom we happen to agree that how could you not have effects? Because it's what is mathematics say, particularly chaos theory. We have the fractal nature of reality. Everything reflects what's behind it in the food chain or in the atomic chain. So you have to have the same effects in one form or another. In the macroscopic level, the level of us and trees and grasshoppers and mountains and UFOs, and they have got to be real from the viewpoint, from the same things that are principles that apply in quantum mechanics at the subatomic level. And this is what I've seen since 1970 in the trenches, and it's what Ben has seen too in his long tenure with me now, 12 years, and I don't see any other way to interpret it. I'd love to hear another explanation if quantum physics isn't it, or the hologram.
We've had Marie D. Jones on talking about quantum physics and all that. Pretty
we know
interesting.
Marie.
Yeah.
It goes back to that 0-point energy field and how everything is pretty much connected and is an organic being itself.
Effectively, and that's what the ancients would tell you. I had that 7-hour conversation in Australia with the Aboriginal elder, and another one almost as long in Quebec with the Cree elder, who told me different sides of the planet told me exactly the same thing, which is what, in the terms of physics, you just described, Barbara.
Wow.
Everybody's taking a vote in the chat room.
Yeah, I think we're at 5 votes now for you to return. And all of us get coffee, and we just discuss this for another 2 hours.
Well, I don't drink coffee, so what do I do?
I do, though.
Yeah, Ben does. Yeah, he can carry the conversation.
Beverage of your choice.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Our time is going by pretty fast, and maybe you can take 5 minutes maybe, and you got another place, because you guys went to England, and you had this one story from over there where you had coming and going in England, vanishing cottages.
Yes. Well, we were also at Rendlesham Forest. Well, this is on a separate trip. When Ben was with me, we were at Rendlesham Forest for a couple of days in 2012, and we think that's another flap area. We were with Larry Warren, who was one of the witnesses to the 1980 UFO landings when he was in the Air Force. But that's not what you asked, Henry. The vanishing, it's chapter 8, and it's the coming and going in England, and it's kind of a strange thing that kind of happened there. We were, it was me. I was in 1989. And there was a British couple, Mr. and Mrs. Clifford Pye, and I talked to their nephew, who related the story to me. And it took place in 1933, and they were on vacation in the county of Cornwall in England's extreme southwest. And they took a trip by bus to this town called Boscastle. And as a matter of fact, if people are fans of the BBC show, what is it, Ben? Doc Martin. This is right near that lovely village where that's filmed. So I don't know.
Really?
Nothing paranormal.
My wife watches Doc Martin all the time, and that's a place she wants to go to.
Well, it's got more to it than meets the eye, Henry. So anyway, they went to this hilltop inn, and they hiked all the way up there. After having had a meal there, they really loved it. And the bus took them there. And they all got out, had lunch, went back down. They liked the little inn so much, they hiked back up there. And it was gone. And they thought they'd gone to the wrong place or something. But they asked around down in the village, and they were told that no such place had ever existed there. So again, this is another example of one of these weird things, coming and going. in this case in England. So it's just a really strange case. Again, in the 1930s, there are a number of these stories. The little girl who was bicycling in Wiltshire, that's the county where Stonehenge is. This again is in the 1930s, and I heard this from one of her descendants who said that the story came down to the family, everybody believed it, and it wasn't that long ago, as families are in the 1930s, not really that long ago if you're a historian, and traveling on one of the old Roman roads. And her name was Edna, as I recall, and it started to rain, and she was all wet, and she came upon this lovely little cottage, and just went to the door, and a kind of this funny old man, long gray hair and thick beard, answered the door, let her in, and he was sitting there smoking his pipe. There was a strange bird, such as she'd never seen, in a cage. He had a dark green coat with shiny buttons, like some kind of elf or something. I don't know. I'm not saying that's what this was, but she found a little place by the fire and sat there and kind of dried off. But the funny thing was, he never spoke to her. A very pleasant smile, and she never heard a sound while she was in this house. Not the fire, not the bird, nothing.
Wow.
Very strange. And we sometimes see this where people will see things and not hear the sound, or where people will hear the sounds, and one thinks of electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs, and Ben is a sound expert. That's what his degree is, and he could talk about that, but we have no time. So anyway, these are all things that have either happened to us, or we've talked to people to whose relatives these have happened, or this sort of thing, as in this case. They found out that the cottage had been occupied about 50 years before this, and returning a week later, the little girl found, or the young girl found, that the place was in ruins. So,
wow.
Another example of that.
Well, you guys have been great, and everybody's hollering. They want you guys to come back, and you say you got another book coming out before long?
Well, there's my 1998 book, Faces at the Window, is going to be in its third edition. So any month now, it should be out from Barking Cat Books or New River Press. I'm not sure which imprint. Yay. And so they have expanded stories and some additional ones, including the Flashing Nexus, something that people have never heard of before.
Well, we'd like to get you guys back on. Hope you guys can come back. Very interesting. Great book, and I want you to give out all your information, where people can get the book, and about your radio show too, because I'm sure you're going to get a lot more listeners now wanting to come and listen to you.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you. Well, the book is called Behind the Paranormal: Everything You Know Is Wrong, from Schiffer Publishing, and you can get it. A lot of stores have it. If the bookstore doesn't have it, they can get it. You can get it online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the usual places. But if you go to BehindTheParanormal.com, our show website, get it there. There's a bookstore link. We'll be happy to sign it for you, and no extra charge. We're not that egotistical. So the show is Behind the Paranormal. It's broadcast in the Boston-Providence area in the WON 1240 AM radio, and that's every Sunday from 12 noon to 1. And at BehindTheParanormal.com, there are always recordings of every show. They're all free. There are over 700 hours of them if you have the time. If you're an over-the-road trucker, you're all set. And we also have a site NewEnglandGhosts.com. Ben, you want anything to add?
Let's see, Facebook page. We do have a YouTube channel.
Yes.
Which we do, due to personal events and the holidays, we have yet to get our latest video up, but eventually it will get there. Hopefully. That's called,
Behind the Paranormal Case Files is what we've been doing on the YouTube.
Yes. Which we have a couple of videos on there of different cases that we or other people have investigated, and it's more detailed look into cases that we don't usually do on our show.
Wow. All right.
Nice.
We want you guys to stay on till after we're off. We'll talk with you for a few minutes. Jeff, you got to go.
Yes. I know. You can go to my website, jeffgould.net, GEOFF/2011PNV.htm. That's my Paranormal View hub page, which you can access previous shows, reports, guests' websites, and book links, etc., as well as previous shows' archived podcasts. The show's official website is theparanormalview.com. We're at facebook.com/theparanormalview, all one word. Make sure your settings are set to see our show updates and weirdness articles that get posted throughout the week. And please feel free to follow me at Real Badger on both Twitter and on Instagram.
All right, Kat?
Okay, you can find me at catcloco.com. That's KATKLOCKOW. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram under that same spelling. And you can follow my comic books there and also find a place where you can order my new book, Ohio's Haunted Crime, also printed by Schiffer Publishing.
All right. Well, it's been a great show, and I'm glad everybody was here and had a great time. Chat room was real active tonight. Appreciate that. And those listening from around the world, we appreciate you also. So this is Henry Foister.
Jeffrey Gould.
Barbara Duncan.
And Kat Cloco.
And we will see you guys next week at the same time. So good night, everybody.